All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice exam number 6, where we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack and practice exams. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. 142. After waking up in the morning, Martin finds himself lying in bed for 30 minutes and scrolling through his phone. He wants to eliminate this behavior so that he can have more time in the morning for other things. He starts writing down antecedents to the scrolling and then identifies other things he can do following those antecedents. What does this procedure sound like? Now, this has to do with our self-control, or in other words, what we call self-management tactics. That's really important for self-management tactics, that you understand where each specific strategy or intervention or tactic falls into place, because they can seem similar, but they all serve a very important purpose. So in this case, we're looking at Martin, and he is trying to change his behavior of lying in bed for 30 minutes and scrolling through his phone. He wants to eliminate it so he has more time in the morning for other things. So what does he do? Well, he writes down antecedents to the scrolling. So he's looking at things that happened before the scrolling that are likely evoking the behavior or that have stimulus control over the behavior. And then he identifies other things he can do following those antecedents. And so that's the key here. I have my antecedents, or what's evoking or what has stimulus control over my behavior. And then I'm identifying other things I can do besides scrolling in bed. So what does this procedure most sound like? A, self-instruction. Self-instruction is basically self-talk, right? You're talking yourself through a behavior, through a strategy, whatever it might be. You're talking yourself through something. He's not self-talking here, right? He's just making note of antecedents and then other things he can do following those antecedents. So what he's trying to do is what we call habit reversal. And with habit reversal, we take our antecedents or whatever events precede the behavior occurring, and then we engage in a competing response. Skinner called this doing something else. Skinner said, do something else. So instead of lying in bed for 30 minutes, where the antecedent might be waking up and picking up my phone, Martin goes and does something else. That's habit reversal. Self-monitoring is systematically collecting data on your own behavior, responses versus non-responses. He's not taking data on his own behavior. He's basically doing an assessment for the antecedents and identifying other responses he can take. Monitoring is a systematic data collection where you're recording responses and non-responses on your own behavior. And then self-evaluation is when you essentially take that self-monitoring data and you compare it against a preset criterion. So again, understand each of those interventions and where they fit into our self-management strategy as a whole. Each one of these are these different tactics and ideas we can use to better self-manage. In Martin's case, he's going to do something else. He's going to engage in habit reversal. Grace's assistant makes, on average, 15 mistakes per day. Grace knows that no one is perfect and she can't eliminate mistakes entirely, but she would like for her assistant to start making less errors. Now, if the assistant makes less than 10 errors during the day, Grace gives her a small bonus. What is Grace using? On the surface, pretty easy question, right? So we're looking at Grace and what she's using in this particular case. So on average, her assistant makes 15 mistakes per day. Grace knows no one is perfect. She wants to eliminate these mistakes entirely, or she can't eliminate the mistakes entirely, but she wants less errors. Essentially, how can I make her make less errors? Well, she sets a criterion for 10 errors. And so now her assistant must make less than 10 errors during the day to get the reinforcement. So what does that sound like to you? Well, to me, it sounds like differential reinforcement. And we are doing what? Well, we're trying to reduce a behavior that's already in the repertoire. If we look at A, differential reinforcement of other behaviors, we aren't eliminating, or we aren't reinforcing in the presence or the absence of a behavior. The behavior is still occurring, it's just occurring less. Remember, with the differential reinforcement of other behaviors, we reinforce when the target behavior isn't occurring at all. The target behavior can still occur, it's just happening less. So if we look at B and C, we have diminishing rates of behaviors, right? Differential reinforcement of diminishing rates of behaviors. This is when we try to start reducing how often a behavior is occurring. Now, D, differential reinforcement of higher rates of behavior, is not going to be our answer because we don't want higher rates, right? We're looking strictly for reducing these behaviors. So we have to ask ourselves, is this an interval DRD or is it a full session DRD? Well, with an interval DRD, it's exactly what it sounds like. You'd break it up, either your session or your sample into intervals, and your DRD would be during those intervals. In this case, Grace is taking the full session because she says the assistant has to make less than 10 errors during the entire day. So it is throughout the entire session. So Grace is going to give her a small bonus if she can make less than 10 errors during the day. Grace is using a full session differential reinforcement of diminishing rates of behavior. Don't be intimidated by that long description. Just break it down. Full session just simply means the entire time. So we have one shot for the entire time. And then you have differential reinforcement of diminishing rates, which you should already know. So if you combine those, you get the full session DRD. Straightforward as that. Don't overcomplicate that any more than it needs to be. 144, Alexandra just completed a continuing education course related to literacy and autism. She wants to attempt some of the interventions with her client. She collects baseline data, then introduces a phonics-based approach for 6 days, then introduces a naturalistic approach for 6 days, before returning back to baseline. What type of design is she likely using? Now, I don't normally represent writing down things unless we're talking things like stimulus equivalence or maybe respondent conditioning. In this case, you could mark down the different conditions. So we have Alexandra, who is trying to attempt some interventions with her client. The question is asking about the design she's likely using. Well, first, she collects baseline data. So we have baseline here. Then she introduces a phonics-based approach for 6 days. So it looks like an A-B design. Then she introduces a naturalistic approach for 6 days. So that's a different intervention. We've changed conditions. So we have a baseline A, phonics-based B, naturalistic C, and then she goes back to baseline, back to A. So we have an A, B, C, A type of design. It's clearly not changing criterion. It's not multiple baseline because we don't have any indication that she's collecting data across settings or participants. We just know she collects baseline, changes condition, back to baseline. She goes A, B, C, A. So what type of design is she likely using? A, reversal design. Now, if reversal design was the only answer that fit, you could say it's a reversal design because technically it is. But is there a better way to describe this type of reversal design? What about B, a multi-element design? Well, remember, with the multi-element design, we aren't going to use the same intervention for 6 days in a row. A multi-element design might look like baseline and then rapidly alternating between phonics and naturalistic. She didn't do that. It's not multi-element. What she did was a multiple treatment reversal design. She went baseline, phonics condition, naturalistic condition, reverse back to baseline, A, B, C, A. And it's not a multiple baseline design because we don't know if she's across participants or across settings. We just know she's collecting baseline data with her one client, apparently. We don't know enough information to say multiple baseline. We do have enough information to say with confidence she's using some type of multiple treatment reversal design. In order for an equivalence class to be formed, all stimuli in the class must possess what? All right, kind of a fluency question, pretty straightforward. Equivalence class is related to are stimulus equivalence, so the idea of matching to samples, and then derived learning. So when we have reflexivity and symmetry, we hope that transitivity is derived, right? So A equals A, then A equals B, B equals A, and then A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. Now, if we want an equivalence class, that means all the stimuli in the class have all these things, where we have stimuli in the class have reflexivity, they have symmetry, and they have transitivity. So they possess these common characteristics, and they possess all three to truly form an equivalence class. Now, what to take away from this question? Maybe not too much. It's more of a fluency learning question, which is fine. So just know, for an equivalence class, we need all these aspects of stimulus equivalence: reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity. 146, the first time his son said more, Jason smiled and gave him another bite. After a couple of weeks, Jason only gave his son another bite following more if more was said 3 times. What was Jason doing? Now, the question is asking about what Jason is doing. You're not here to evaluate the intervention. Don't make that mistake. Answer the question. The question is, what is Jason doing? Not evaluate the intervention. So what is Jason doing? Well, the first time his son said more, Jason smiled and gave him another bite. So he tried to apparently reinforce more. Then after a couple of weeks, Jason would only give his son another bite following more if more was said 3 times. So break that down into our terms, schedules. First time the son said more, he was continuously reinforced. Jason then moved to a FR3, right? If more was said 3 times in a row or 3 times, engaged in 3 responses, you would get reinforcement. So we moved from a continuous schedule to a fixed ratio 3 schedule. What is that called? Well, A, fading. Jason is fading out the reinforcement. Fading and shaping are almost opposite, right? Because when you're shaping, you're reinforcing approximations closer and closer to what you're looking at. With fading, you're just either increasing the response requirement or decreasing the amount of reinforcement available. In this case, Jason's done both. You have to say more 3 times and less reinforcement's available. Differentiating or response differentiation is when we're trying to identify or choose between different responses, not doing that the same response each time. More, so Jason is not differentiating responses, he is fading. 147, which of the following prompting strategies is likely to be the most costly in terms of effort by the person administering the prompt? All right, let's think about this. We're looking at prompting strategies, and we're looking at the one that's likely to be the most costly in terms of effort by the person administering the prompt. Which is going to be the most difficult for the person administering the prompt as far as how much effort they must put forth? A, least to most prompting. Well, least to most prompting, at the start, the least prompting you can give is no prompting, where you just allow the learner to engage in a response. That takes no effort, so A cannot be right. What about B, graduated guidance? Graduated guidance is more effort because it is a physical type of prompt, but you're only physically prompting as needed, so there's a chance you don't even need to prompt. However, with C, errorless learning, you are preventing mistakes from happening. That's going to take a lot of effort, especially if the kid is quick or if there's a lot of different targets you're looking at. Errorless learning can be very costly in terms of effort and time because we are preventing errors from happening by response blocking, by redirecting. It can be very challenging. What about model prompting? Well, model prompting, you're just engaging in the response. So it can be quite easy to model prompt depending on the response you're modeling. Errorless learning, however, is typically the most costly in terms of effort because of what goes into response blocking, redirecting, and preventing the errors from happening before they get a chance to occur. And then 148, if you're designing a self-monitoring plan for a client of yours, when would you recommend that they deliver self-administered consequences? So we're looking at self-administered consequences here. So that could be reinforcement, that could be punishment. You typically want to choose things that are easy to obtain. And you want to make sure you're only giving yourself consequences when you actually earn those consequences. Avoid bootleg reinforcement. And so if you have that plan and it's self-monitoring, when are you going to deliver your self-administered consequences? Following self-instruction, self-evaluation, self-monitoring, or you cannot self-administer a consequence. Now, is self-administering a consequence always the most effective? Maybe not, but you can self-administer a consequence, so we can take that off. Self-instruction doesn't mean you're actually engaging in the response. You're just talking yourself through the response. We take that off. So back to our initial questions, what's the difference between evaluation and monitoring? With monitoring, you're actually systematically taking the data. With evaluation, you're comparing those results to another criterion. You want to be reinforcing yourself in the moment, right? Remember contiguity, closeness of reinforcement. So you want to be reinforcing yourself as you self-monitor. If you get 2 in a row right, maybe you reinforce. Once you have all that data, then you can evaluate, but you want to reinforce while you're monitoring so you can actually reinforce when the behavior is occurring. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you have not already. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. As usual, work hard, study hard, and we'll see you soon.